I'm opening. We have an eye, sort of a nostril, 2 teeth. One of the teeth has a small cavity. Close call, folks, but I think we got here just in time.
Presented by Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro. This is Anatomy of a Movie. In-depth discussions and breakdowns of various movie titles. And now that you've seen the movie, let the dissection begin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Anatomy of a Movie. Are we dissecting a very specific movie? No, not necessarily. But I guarantee you, most of these movies you have seen. It's the Anatomy of a Movie X-Men Special. Right in time for X-Men Days of Future Past, we have Demetri Panos.
Hey, movie fans. Snickety snick.
We have Marisa Serafini, huge Famke Jensen fan.
I am. Hello, everyone.
That was the only requisite for getting her on the panel.
Yep.
And
no,
we have
I am a fan of the X-Men movies. So.
And we have a rare treat where Marisa and I actually get to co-host together because Stephen Lemieux, also a fan of the X-Men, is in the booth.
Currently, yes. Hello.
And we will, as mentioned, we will definitely be talking about X-Men Days of Future Past. So don't worry if you're tuning into this, you're like, where's my X-Men Days of Future Past dissection? It is coming. And it is coming along with a very special guest, John Ottman.
Oh, very excited.
Editor, composer of not only that movie, but many great movies.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I can't wait.
I
Big
cannot
fan.
wait to pick his brains.
Same here.
So that's coming next Friday. In Internet World, you'll blink and it's already be here, or it's going to be past and you're just downloading the archived version.
Right.
Either way you're listening to it, it is coming or it is already up there. But today we are talking about the X-Men Special. We're talking about all X, I'll call it X1, X2, and X3, The Last Stand. Talking about Wolverine, talking about X-Men First Class, and anticipation building up towards X-Men Days of Future Past.
Yeah.
Let's start with this. There's such a great history. Demetri.
Yes.
What does X-Men mean to you, and how did you get engulfed in the universe?
It's a great question because first and foremost, if you watch these podcasts, you listen to us, I'm more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy. I've said this before. So I never really latched onto the X-Men as a comic book. I knew who they were, and I knew some of the some of the branchings off and such. For me, my first leap into X-Men lore was the movies. And this one was, for Marvel, this was one of their first foray before they started doing Fantastic Four. X-Men was it for them. And, Bryan Singer directed. They had some good staff on for writers. And again, it was going in somewhat familiar. And I saw that first X-Men movie in 2000. And I was like, wow, this is what a comic book movie can and should be. It was a great story, great origin story. You set up a build to conflict. You had Wolverine. It basically broke out Hugh Jackman. I'm a Star Trek fan, so we had Captain Picard as Charles Xavier, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen. You had a really great cast.
Halle Berry. They had to rewrite scenes for her more because she had just won an Oscar at around that time. So they were like, we gotta get her more scenes in the movie.
And and then the beautiful Famke Janssen, who is coming off of being a villain in GoldenEye, and I just always find her beautiful. Also, she was in a Star Trek episode where she starred with Patrick Stewart, so there was familiarity there. And I'm like, wow, as far as writing goes for an origin story, X-Men really has it all. You're put into this universe, this X universe. You set up your villain, but in a really smart way. I'm talking about Magneto, and then setting up your conflict, setting up how are they gonna get out of this one? They'd had great action sequences. So I was all in. And then the unthinkable, they make X2. And they make a sequel on that rare occasion. They make a sequel that is as good as, if not, some say it's better than the original movie. And this is how I really got into watching these X-Men movies. And we'll get into Last Stand later. But those first two movies to me, I compare to Superman, Superman 2. This is Christopher Reeves. I compare them to, I'll put it to like the Dark Knight movies. There was another one that just popped out of my head, but yeah,
I know Marissa's chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, you mentioned X1 and X2, but I know that when they were making the first X-Men movie, that they were contractually obligated to make the sequel. So that was already a 1-2 punch from the beginning. I grew up with the X-Men movies because I am that younger generation, and it appealed to me at that young age. Obviously, I'm too young to grow up with the comics from when they started, but watching the films, being those summer big blockbuster movies, especially during the early 2000s, they were huge. And this is, I feel, the Marvel comic franchise that really launched Marvel comic movies.
Absolutely.
And they're like, well, the X-Men movies were so great, let's make more Marvel Comics movies and build those franchises too. But X-Men was like the first big one. And I love the cast members. I mean, I was a big fan of Hugh Jackman when I was younger because he was big in musicals, so I knew who Hugh Jackman was. And then everybody just mixed in together. And I also loved just the concept of mutants and their humanity. And I could relate to them because mutants, they are people who tend to be persecuted. And they were always discriminated against. And as a person, I could relate to being that outcast and then having this place, the safe haven of, Xavier's school, for a place for people to accept each other because we're all so different. But that makes us common in that way, and that always appealed to me. And I love that concept, and I love how they just keep building upon that we need to work together in order to stand against the people who are against you.
Fair enough. Well, for me, there was always the Saturday morning cartoons,
Right.
but I didn't really get into it until like X-Men Evolution, and I enjoyed that part of it. But I never really fully understood it until the movies. It wasn't later in life until I gained a full appreciation for it. What I like most is the metaphor of what they represent. I mean, it's the big conflict has always been mutants versus humans, but then it also goes beyond that because, the mutants within their own community have different ideologies. Certainly the humans have different ideology. And so, then you kind of realize the silliness almost of that classification of like, okay, mutants versus humans, because just if you take everyone at their real value, everyone, you can connect on different levels regardless of whatever. You just have to find your own sort of classifications.
Sure.
So I always found that appealing to me. It's I like, because there are so many, everyone can kind of relate to somebody. Although certainly, you can't argue Wolverine's been forever the breakout hit of all of this.
Yeah.
And they just go back to the well with him in that regard. But yeah, I was a fan. And for me, I enjoyed the first three, but then when X-Men First Class came out, it rejuvenated in such a different way.
Yeah, I agree. And you brought up something that it really kicked off Marvel. And, had X-Men not been the hit that it was back in 2000, not only would we not have gotten that amazing sequel, but I just also wonder, would they have gone forward in doing Spider-Man? Because Spider-Man, Sam Raimi, came out in 2002. And again, you made Sam Raimi's first two Spider-Man movies, again, like they almost, again, you have X2 and Spider-Man 2, and had the first X-Men movie flopped, it had been a piece of garbage, it just makes me wonder, would we have gotten Spider-Man? Would Marvel have continued to push? And then we get, then we've come to the Marvel franchises that we now are so entrenched in our pop culture cinematic society with Iron Man, the Avengers, Captain America, Thor. Like, all this stemmed from X-Men, the first movie. And they got it right the first time. Not every movie has been great within the X-Men, let's call it, universe. But then again, Fantastic Four, the second one, it's okay. But they always seem to right the ship.
Which is what, I love the part about the X-Men Days of Future Past everyone's anticipating. It's just going to right the wrongs of X-Men Last Stand. They're just going to erase history.
Yeah.
And again, without spoiling anything in that regard, it's when you go back in time, you have to change history. So you imagine you're going to change something of whatever happened in X-Men Last Stand.
Yeah. So, I just think that they've come up with you have a good cast of characters too. You have good actors involved, and the writing has been solid. Bryan Singer's direction, and again, it's one of those things that we always talk about. How does the guy that's done Usual Suspects, you give him money to do a comic book action adventure movie, and he did it. He handled himself great.
Well, the way Hugh Jackman says, I mean, you keep saying it's an origin story, and it is. And we, our eyes and ears into the world is through Rogue, Anna Paquin at the time, and Hugh Jackman, right? Because, and especially Hugh Jackman in the sense that, everyone keeps going to the decision of, you got to be with a Xavier or Magneto. And who are you going to choose? And he's kind of in the middle, much like to some degree, if, as we're pointing out, we're just entering this universe overall. Some might have been familiar, but it's like, okay, whose side do you really choose? And Wolverine's, our eyes and ears into that.
Mm-hmm. And it was smart, too, because, well, as you said, Wolverine was the breakout character. In fact, even in the comic book world, Wolverine gets his own comic book. So he shoots off, and we were having a discussion before, and it's like Wolverine doesn't always stand with the X-Men. Sometimes he goes away, and then he'll come back.
He's a very conflicted person.
Yeah. And it's not like he's against the X-Men. And again, I'm not going off of comic book lore and history, but, he's not always with them because he's off doing his own thing. But he'll come back when they need the help and whatnot. And he's a great focal character, and they were very wise in setting Wolverine up in that first one because, like you said, we need to watch this universe through somebody's eyes, and Wolverine's perfect because he has that mystery behind him, which is explored in X2. And
and also going off of Wolverine's character, he's the only person that can take us back decades.
True.
Because no one else has his ability to live for so long. So we have to, in order to see history, we have to be with someone who was actually there. So I can understand why Wolverine can go in so many different places, so many different times.
But it's also great because he tends to forget history.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
He's able to go in any part of history, but without knowing the history. So I think it's, and it's not, it works in that regard. It's not like too far-fetched.
Yeah, and it also works with Mystique as well because she has a history too. And I didn't realize, because we know her character, she can shapeshift, but I didn't know her real age because she portrays so many different people, how old she is, what's her history, how their mutations are both alike in that way, that they can travel back. Well, they can take the audience back to
and that's
different
for me.
times.
That's why I really loved X-Men First Class because it gave you such a more bigger appreciation of what everything was already pre-established in the first three films because, you got to see Mystique as a young kid and her really growing up with Charles and, and then how Charles really grew to become who he is. And
the same thing with
Eric.
Magneto, with Eric as well. And in these stories, you are as strong as your characters. And I think in X-Men First Class, and I think the first two X-Men movie, there was so much time and care taken to focus on these characters because there really was a bond and a friendship between Xavier and Eric. And they both understood one another. It was just how were they going to separate? Like, what was going to be the catalyst that says, hey, I'm going this way, you can come with me. But there's always a mutual respect for one another. And I appreciate that because it's not just a blind hatred.
It's a mutual frustration of like, why don't you see it?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Why do you have to be so stupid?
Yep. On both sides.
Yeah.
And as an audience member, you understand it. Like, you get why Eric is the way he is. You know that he's not necessarily doing the right thing, but you see where those origins come from, those feelings come from. And then Xavier, too, you understand his viewing as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's they both have the same objective at the end of the day, and that's what makes them have that respect for each other, and they're always out for the betterment of mutants out there in that community. But it's also the means in which they go about one certain thing. Xavier goes the more rational route, and with Magneto's way of always being persecuted from surviving World War II and then going through the camp in that way. So he has a more negative defensive way against humanity. He calls them Homo sapiens, which is like a very, very original, primal naming convention for people. So like to go back to that is like that's just how mankind has evolved, that they still think that way. And we see Xavier, he's open to people's changes. Like he believes that people can be good. Right. So it's the means in which they go about something.
Yeah, and motivation too, I think, is an important word, because each is similar. They want to get similar goals, but their motivations as to why each one has ended up the way they are. And I think what was great about X-Men is the setup, because you do learn about Magneto's background more so than Xavier, but they had that fantastic scene at the beginning, and nobody expects like a Holocaustish type of a scene to come from a comic book movie, but I really think it set the tone because it made things serious, and you understand Eric's motivation. He's ripped away from his parents, he's crying, he's getting angry, and he bends that fence down, and and he also notices the marks, the marks in the arms, and from a child he understood the persecution for being a particular race, branding, and now on top of that he's a mutant. You understand his motivation for his apathy towards Homo sapiens, so to speak. He doesn't trust them.
What I one of the things that I really like, you kind of mentioned it, but I love. So for X-Men First Class, they took that event and they expanded on it, right? Because immediately after, it's like, okay, a coin should be easy for you. But I like now more so they're also playing with going in history, and even just the most recent Wolverine, where they took the events of X-Men Last Stand and kind of Jean Grey's death, and how that's affected Wolverine, and they're going, and how he used to be, and such a soldier in all these different wars. I liked when they tap into history, and they can, the Cuban Missile Crisis,
right?
Whole different perspective on the Cuban Missile Crisis now. So I give them a lot of credit for being able to take history and fit it where it's not absurd, and rewrite it to fit their universe.
Yeah, and it also it gives relevancy. Yeah. It gives a grounding to what is a comic book movie. I mean, it makes it more real in a sense, and you're able to swallow it, because when you look at the follies of history, when you look at that, and then you put this into a perspective, and you make these characters who are born of these various histories, it just goes back, you understand the motivations more. I thought X-Men First Class was the perfect way to wipe out that awful taste that Last Stand left us all by, in a sense, it was a reboot in a sense, but they did it so wise, so smart, again, that it just harkened back to the Bryan Singer movies, where their writing was very sharp, and you got great actors to do this stuff, and they went on from there. So
let me ask you guys this. There's obviously, through the whole movies that we've had, there's reoccurring people. And I want to talk about the reoccurring people, and I also want to talk about, mutants that have come and gone, so to speak, at least in the movie sense. Certainly Sabretooth counts as part of the people that have come and gone. Gambit, although huge news with Gambit now.
Big news.
Right.
But Gambit, to me, like, if it wasn't for me growing up, if it wasn't Wolverine, it was Gambit. So I'm surprised we haven't seen more of Gambit. A Nightcrawler, for me, it was a cool one in X2. I know Marissa loves Jean Grey. So, like, can which ones do you guys kind of miss that, were only cameos or perhaps haven't even come in yet, versus, let's say, the ones that are already there that you like, or versus ones that are there that you like, what, great, but I can do without, in place of?
Well, of course, I'm a big, huge fan of Famke Janssen in and of herself. But Jean Grey was always an interesting character to me. And then when they killed her in the third one, I'm like, why kill Jean? But,
Too powerful.
Yeah, but even her character has that good and that bad, because when she gets reborn, she's Dark Phoenix. So just having those two, the duality of her character, was always interesting to me, because we can see good and evil within one person.
Right.
And just that conflict, I find it fascinating. Other people that I thought were cool are like how they've switched up some people, obviously with casting, but Pyro was also really
Kitty
really
Pryde
cool. Yeah,
to
Kitty
me,
Pryde
like, could be, I always thought was going to be more utilized or made
Talking
bigger.
about the walkthrough of
The
walls.
walk through walls.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And
And
she changed from the first to the
Especially
second.
well now, I mean, when you cast Ellen Page, I mean, now it's just paying dividends. So.
yeah.
But
Because Kitty, I believe, wasn't in the second one, but she was in the first one, played by a completely different person.
Right.
was she?
And
Who's?
some redheaded.
Yeah, I
girl
forget. But
played
and again, she wasn't even. You just saw her
Yeah,
walk.
you
walk
just
through
see
a
her
wall.
walk through a wall.
And
That was it.
the first movie did something really cool too. Again, being a novice in the Marvel world, if you were an X-Men fan, there were so many shots of Xavier's School for the Gifted that they, the mutants were showcasing certain powers that the comic book fan was able to go, oh, like, they didn't mention Kitty Pryde, so to speak, but the girl walked through walls and people, oh, that's Kitty
That's
Pryde.
Kitty.
Oh, that guy is, they for the comic book fan, the Easter eggs, let's say, they were able to get every single one of them. For me, who was the layman going in, I got it. I didn't need to know like the backstories of everybody there, but it made the movie. It didn't take away from the movie at all. And I think that's a strength. Like, let's play to an audience that doesn't know who the X-Men movie are, but let's also pay homage to our fans, because without them, there wouldn't be an X-Men movie.
Yeah.
So, very, very smart. They did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, like, love the cast, obviously, but I find I like the darker people more so, because I get attached to them, and then I root for them because I want them to have those right choices at the end, because they're more conflicted and they have the more real struggles that people have in real life. So I find them more realistic in a way that I want to root for them in the end. When I know the good people, I was like, okay, they're good, I don't have to worry about them. But when it's bad, I was like, oh, I'm fighting for them. I'm with them throughout the movies. So like
Jean Grey.
yes, like I like the people who have that internal and maybe physical like conflict and struggles within them. So.
Here's what they do well, though. They never, even though when you think someone's good, I mean, there's been enough of the movies and there's been enough changes. Like, I mean, just think of X-Men First Class, the whole, drawing the line in the sand at the end, how many people switched right then and there.
Yeah.
It's happened throughout the rest of the series as well. And so, things can change. And I certainly like that aspect of it. Let's talk about Bryan Singer's involvement, because, that's where the third one, unfortunately, did go down. It's because of, Bryan Singer wasn't necessarily involved. But let's talk about kind of his involvement early on in making sure to take care of kind of everything to get it up to par.
I think he's done a great job. He obviously kickstarted X-Men, and if he had done it didn't do a good job, then like Marvel comic universe that we know of wouldn't be as big as it is today.
I agree. And what you get from Bryan Singer too is he has a passion. He is a geek. He loves comic books. He loves this stuff. And X-Men is not his first comic book. Well, it's his first comic book franchise, but then he also went on to do Superman Returns. Mm-hmm. So he loves this genre and he loves interacting with the fans. I mean, you're lucky when you get a director that's as big a fan of this stuff to champion what you're doing and to champion your movie. And when you have a person like a Singer to be who has knowledge of the lore, the history, to go out there, again, he appeals to everybody. He can teach somebody like me about the history, and then to the geeks who are huge into X-Men, they're going, oh, another one of us, and he's a director. Look at that. That's awesome.
Because you do get, we've talked about it. Sometimes there's movies where you're like, okay, that was just commissioned because it was going to make money, versus like, okay, that was someone's pet project.
Right.
So, for example, I mean, do you guys feel that with X-Men Last Stand with Brett Ratner coming in? I mean, in terms of that, I forget if he's a fan. Is he a fan?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brett Ratner, without knowing him, he appears to be a movie fan.
But an X-Men fan.
I'm not. I don't know.
I can't really speak to Brett's perspective on the X-Men, but knowing a lot of different Brett Ratner films, he's done so many different genres. He could do comedy with the Rush Hour franchise. He's done X-Men, and then he's done like the dramatic roles with like the Family Man. So he can do a lot of different types of genre film. He's a great filmmaker.
Yeah, and I think
but X-Men, like a lot of the other ones that you're talking about, they have a universe of their own.
Right.
When you have to, it's a whole different beast to have to enter a universe that is pre-existing and be able to fill it. Now, that's not to say you didn't do research and whatever else, but let's say you talk about the Dark Knight trilogy with Christopher Nolan. They were, they took what was kind of pre-existing and they chose very carefully what they wanted to do, and they made their own kind of world and mythology around the things that appeal to them from the comics.
Right.
And I think unfortunately it might have been, certainly by the time you get to a third movie, unfortunately, you get so rushed to try to pump it out. So if you're just kind of coming into this, you don't have a lot of time to be like, hey guys, can I just get like 3 months to research? No, you got to shoot tomorrow.
And I know with the X-Men, the Last Stand film, they were filming it, and 5 months later it was already out. So they had a rush production on the third film as well. So that might have been something with the directioning, whatever, that may have caused things why people didn't like the third one as much, but maybe it was rush production. Who knows?
And don't forget, I mean, Brett Ratner at the time too was coming off of Rush Hour. I mean, he had established himself as being a money director. So getting him, they didn't think that their cachet was necessarily going to fall from having a Bryan Singer. It made, I guess from a bean counter kind of way, from an accounting and from a studio perspective, getting a Brett Ratner who we know can handle certain kind of action, getting him on, at the time they believed that he was giving cachet. And then sadly, you watch the movie and
so what fell apart in that movie? I mean, was it partly that they brought in so many different mutants? I mean, as mentioned, mutants have come and gone, but that movie in particular brought in so many different mutants.
There
all
was
at once.
I feel like all the X-Men movies in general, we always see more new characters, but they tend to be like, okay, we know who that person is. But I never got totally overwhelmed by all the new mutants. Yes, the third one had a lot of different ones because the story of the cure and the third one affected all the mutants, so we had to see different.
But you just need a massive number. But you didn't necessarily, you didn't necessarily need it to all of a sudden. We didn't need to necessarily follow their storylines. We always had the people that we needed to follow. You didn't, you just need to have more people around them and be like, hey.
I wasn't overwhelmed by all the new people that they brought in that one.
For me, it definitely came from a story structure, and bigger is not always better. It just adding in a bunch of mutants that were just going to be throwaway characters and not really add to anything was bothersome. But again, when you're killing Xavier and
Scott and Jean, that was the part that upset me, and I'm sure a lot of different fans. Like when you kill 3 of your main X-Men who was in the first and second movie, and then kill 3 of them in the third one, people are gonna be disappointed at the end of it.
And you paint yourself in such a corner. Like, where do you go from there? So he just, again, in some of the was it a scene that took place on the Golden Gate Bridge too? Was there a... Yeah, I mean, some of the scenes were just... From what we had been used to seeing, we were able to see great taut action suspense scenes, great superhero stuff going on, and when he expanded it to so big, it just got monotonous, it just got boring and stupid for me. I just walked out being very angry. And the movie made a ton of money its opening
It
weekend.
made a lot, 40 million.
Yeah, and
One of the biggest grossing movies of Memorial Day weekend.
yeah,
Still to
and
this day.
it gave, Ratner credibility. And even though people just hated that movie to no end, but it made a ton of money. So who last?
I mean, but you can only, I don't know. I think you can only sustain that for so long.
Right.
People always say like, oh, if it keeps making money, I think it can only, you know what I mean? Eventually the audience is going to be like, okay, enough.
Yeah.
Like we like this, but you're not giving us what we want, and this sucks.
And look at
And they
what,
got smarter.
they got smarter, and look who okay, so they didn't get Bryan Singer for Last Stand, but from what I understand, they wanted to try to get him. He just couldn't make it work out because I think he was
'Cause he was
working on
doing
Valkyrie at the time.
I thought he was also working on Superman because
Okay.
Superman
Returns.
and X-Men 3 came out in the same summer.
Okay. I was talking Last Stand because
X-Men 3 and
I'm
Superman,
sorry,
they came
First
out in
Class, my
They
bad.
came out in the same.
Because you're right, because they got smarter, because they went to First Class. And First Class, I thought that they wanted to get Bryan Singer involved, but they got Matthew Vaughn. And Matthew Vaughn had done Kick-Ass. And, he has an appreciation for comic book origin and story. And basically, they're going to reboot. And I'm not even sure if that word was officially used, but this was going to jumpstart X-Men again. And they were trying to figure out a way, okay, how do we bring this back to the first two movies? And then we can go on from there. And there was another, I'm trying to think of timeline. Wolverine Origins came out.
It came before First Class.
First Class.
Wolverine Origins came out in 2009. First Class came out in 2011. But if you think about it, if you go from the X-Men movies, which was like 2000, 2003, 2006.
Right.
But then take that break if you completely just skip Origins, which was
Right.
mostly Wolverine. If you go from 2006 to 2011, you have that good 5-year period to readjust things.
Right.
Well,
And I think they did.
Yeah, they definitely did.
Origins didn't really affect the timeline, so to speak.
Exactly.
Wolverine certainly did because it was Wolverine haunted by the tragedy of Jean Grey.
Right.
And how that so I like that aspect of it. I mean, Wolverine, and in that movie it was
Which one? We're talking Wolverine Origins or Wolverine from last summer?
Wolverine last
Okay.
summer. And a lot of people like that because it was it felt like a Wolverine movie in the sense that it was just a Western, a great little Wolverine Western.
It was a Wolverine Western. I mean, I found like hints of some noir in there. I found it to be almost like a detective. I think, in this panel, because we've talked about it before, I think I'm probably the biggest champion of that Wolverine movie that came out last summer. I'm a big fan. I thought that there was great dialogue going on. I thought there was a really cool sort of kind of a mystery happening. And again, a character wanting to shed his power, can always make for good character development because it's one of those things you don't know what you have until you lose it kind of things. But he built up great characters. You talk about history. Again, that was the dropping of the bomb, where he saves the guy. I'm a big fan of that Wolverine, and then how it sort of kind of does go back to like Last Stand, and then of course you get the button at the end, which is leading into this, leads into this X-Men movie where he's walking through the security.
Security.
Yeah, and I don't know. I give credit to Hugh Jackman. You have to. Well, you have to
because he's been
Love
the through
this
line
guy.
for all of this.
All
Love you.
Yeah, and he's just been number one, a great talent, a champion of the franchise, and he's just a great sport about it. Mm-hmm. He loves it. He loves I love when I see pictures of him with kids, and he's doing he'll even put forks in between his fingers, and I so appreciate that. It's going to be a sad day because eventually he's going to hang up his claws, and we talked about that. How
He
much
has
longer
to.
can he do this?
Because it just he's supposed to stay the same, and he's been doing this for this amount of
14 years.
14 years,
that
yeah.
eventually he can't do it for 30, 40 years. He just can't.
Now.
Yeah. But
And he
I give a
recognizes it.
testament to Hugh to constantly love this character that he's portraying for so many years. Because he even said in an interview he's just not ready to let Logan Wolverine go. because he just has that love for this person and his character that he's portraying. So props to him, especially for being like so consistent throughout all of these films.
Yeah, they've managed to the worry there is they've managed to evolve him in such a way where they're constantly giving him a different struggle. Because eventually, you could get to a point where, like, okay, yes, he's fighting, external forces, but they've managed to internalize it within him, and that's always been the Wolverine struggle, and that could get quite boring easily if not done properly.
Yeah, and again, to further champion and give him praise, look, he put his money where his mouth is. So regardless of what I thought of the Origins, that Wolverine movie, okay, he stood behind it. He championed it. He became a producer, and yeah, that's part of the, that's probably part of his deal to keep him on board. But he was he wanted to make sure, like, look, I don't want to cheat the fans. This is for them, and I'm going to do my best to try to shepherd this in and direct it in ways. Now, again, regardless of what I think about it, he took a willing just to participate more than just being an actor. He's really involved in that. And again, you got to appreciate that, because from that we do end up getting like a First Class. You get that other Wolverine movie, which sort of redacts Origins. And again, I think he was a producer in that movie, and he knows usually if you have a movie that doesn't work, they don't think to give you a sequel. They don't think to, well, the first Origins Wolverine movie didn't do that great. But, now they do, and they figure out a way that will make it smarter, and he's on board to do it. I'm sure he gets paid what he's due, which is fantastic. But, again, it's so rare to have an actor who
I want to
loves
talk
this.
about, again, there's such a plethora of actors. You can talk about just recently, in the more recent ones, Jennifer Lawrence, and what she has Hunger Games, she's got this, and she's got... American Hustle. She's got so many. She's got Oscar winners and franchise movies.
She's what, 23, 24?
She's 23. She's my
Yeah.
age.
But Ian, again, we could go down the list of everybody and their resumes. They're incredible. But from Ian McKellen, Lord of the Rings, just so everyone just has X-Men just has multiple franchises of the actors themselves.
Yeah,
and it's
and-
Yeah, it
incredible.
was like even Anna Paquin she's coming out with True Blood, and so like I feel a lot of these people who have successful careers really you can trace them back to X-Men, because as big as the X-Men movies, these films were like big kickstarters to their careers as well.
And here's something else too. When you talk about an Ian McKellen or Patrick Stewart or Hugh Jackman and Anna Paquin and Famke Janssen, Halle Berry, they're doing these movies like Ian McKellen. I never get the sense as an audience, as a movie fan, I never
Gandalf.
I never get the sense they're doing it for a paycheck.
Yeah.
I actually get the sense that they're having a good time, that they're taking the subject matter seriously, and I'm sure they're being very well compensated for their job and what they're doing. But there are some performances, and we've talked about it here, when you're like, paycheck. He was just in it for a paycheck. I never get that sense from any one of these people, which makes me respect them more as actors, because it's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely great.
And even to go off of that a little bit, even like the cameos, in the X-Men First Class, we saw Rebecca Romijn and Hugh Jackman just make those uncredited cameos. So it's just they want to be a part of the franchise, not just that paycheck.
Yeah.
I will say that there's one cameo from X-Men First Class that pays off in a very comedic way. It's not really even a spoiler in Days of Future Past. So
Okay.
you'll know what I mean when you see it.
Okay. I'm in the midst of rewatching at least X2, and then I'll watch First Class, and perhaps
And then you'll
Wolverine
build
if I
up to
can.
it.
Yeah. Because again, I do hold the first two movies in high regard. I hold the second movie. The second movie is fantastic. X2 is just a great movie. I'm gonna lay on some Star Trek trivia here, because X2, if you remember how it ends. Okay, it ends on Jean Grey on a very
Voiceover.
emotional, sacrificial, as she's saving the X-Men. Now, X and X2, one of the producers, a gentleman by the name of Ralph Winter, who produced Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Now, the ending of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, in which Spock sacrifices himself to save the crew of the Enterprise and his captain, it mirrors what happens in X2. And Ralph Winter has said, I wanted that emotion. I wanted to lose. If I'm going to lose a character, I want it to be for a reason, for a purpose, and for a great purpose. And think about it, like that was such an emotional wallop. And you get so invested. X2 to me, I can say, probably make the argument it's a little bit better than the first X-Men. Last Stand happened, oh well. Origins Wolverine happened, oh well. But then thank God, you get Matthew Vaughn to come in, in First Class, just like won me back.
So let's talk about, we don't, we'll wrap this up kind of in a few minutes, but James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, they have to, now they have to portray not only a character, but they have to portray the character of two people that have already portrayed the character and pretend to be them. It's not like, full reboot. You still have to give homage to that because, they were amazing at it. And they just, I love them as young guys. I love seeing the dynamic of those two, and I think just perfect casting.
I agree, and I loved how they used their youthful ways to their characters and how they played off of that, because people can change from what we've already know and have been established with the older gentlemen, that going back to the younger selves, you can see them they can take those creative liberties and go in their own different way. Like, I'm going to portray him in his adolescence or younger self and all my emotional angst at that time. Right. But they can have fun with that, knowing that eventually they're going to lead and change to that point where we all know.
Yeah, and again, I think it was a brilliance in casting with those folks, because again, I'm not even sure that reboot is the right word, because again, you are still playing in that universe. You're fully making reference, and these characters are going to become Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, and you buy it. It just gives them a great, fantastic history. That's why I think First Class just does a brilliant job of just bringing everything back to the basics. Let's introduce. They're not the X-Men yet. We already know as an audience, and again, when you think about it too, as a movie-going audience, how much do you actually pay attention to a movie that came out in 2000? But you do. You sort of kind of they do this seamless thing that we know they become this team in the first 2-3 movies, and we're gonna play with that before they were a team. Rose Byrne too. They made a great addition of putting her in there, because she's sort of like the every woman who, what the hell's going on, and
asking all the questions of the audience. And also the thing with them, their younger selves, we as an audience can see how they helped each other grow in being mutants, because in First Class we see Xavier help Magneto move that big satellite dish, and now we see Magneto just tearing up the place, so like nothing. So we can see how they both help each other grow in their powers and in characters. Yeah,
and they had to always rely on one another, and I think that's what makes them not being friends, it makes it that much more tragic, because that they were, in their hearts, Magneto could have been a really good guy. He could have helped the cause, but
Magneto even helped build Cerebro that helps Xavier. So just they had that help with and respect for each other, and makes it all the more tragic that they invent their own
what they've become, or what Magneto has become. Yeah, it's great motivation. I think they've fantastic job.
All this to say that there is a box set of all of these X-Men movies that you can definitely pick up, go watch, and then go watch X-Men Days of Future Past and see us here.
I can't believe that we're done. We're wrapping up. There seems like there's so much more.
I
didn't realize I was such a big fan. This is an exciting thing to do.
Here's the good news. We're giving them just a little bit of a tease, and ourselves a tease too, because we're going to geek out in full force next Friday, X-Men Days of Future, because it brings all this stuff together, and what better way to bring it all together than a composer, an editor, John Ottman.
I
my
can't wait.
goodness.
I can't wait. That's
This-
a big score for us.
Epic.
I can't wait.
Pun intended. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. Please let us know what you love about the X-Men universe, whether the comic books, the TV shows, the movies,
The actors.
the actors. Let us know what you
Yeah.
dislike. And let us know your favorite characters. I remember the Mad Men actress in First Class. Now we don't see her. You know,
Right.
again, characters who have come and gone.
Oh,
Let us know-
January Jones.
January
I
Let
had
us-
to think
yeah.
about that.
Let us know which characters you love, which characters are gone. And we will be back next Friday. It's a slight teaser, all in preparation for that very special day.
Can't wait.
See you next Friday.
Bye, all.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.
Thanks for watching Anatomy of a Movie on YouTube. For more on your favorite movies, subscribe to our channel here and be sure to let us know what you think in our comment section below here. Bye.